Alex, what is up? It's another episode of Dirt Nap City. I'm very excited that we're both here. How are you doing?
I'm so happy to be with you today, Kelly.
Thank you. Well, the Thanksgiving episode was amazing. I hope everybody learned a lot about John Howland and the Pilgrims. And today's episode is going to be just as amazing. I have somebody that is going to really break the trend. Why don't I start with a few clues? And as everybody knows, if you're a regular listener to the show, Alex does not know who the person is that we'll be talking about. One of us doesn't. And in this case, it's Alex. I've selected the person, done the research, and Alex is going to learn about this person. And you already know because you clicked on the button to download the podcast. We appreciate that. But let's see if we can give Alex some clues. And, honestly, I feel better when he does guess it than when he doesn't. I feel like that's more of an accomplishment. So, Alex, first of all, she was born in 1884 and died in 1962.
I'm happy to hear that we've broken the mold. We've broken the gender barrier here.
Yes.
At Dirt Nap City. Wow, died in 1962.
Yep, born in 1884 in New York and lived there most of her life.
Okay. We talking Marilyn Monroe?
No, I don't think she was born in the 1800s, was she?
I don't know.
No, I don't think she was quite that old. Maybe, but...
No, she probably wasn't. You're right. That's a stupid guess.
She went by her middle name.
It doesn't help me.
All right. She was involved in U.S. politics and later the United Nations.
Barbara Jordan?
You know what? Funny you should say that. That was somebody I considered and still might do someday, but it's not Barbara Jordan in this case. She was the longest serving first lady in U.S. history.
Eleanor Roosevelt?
Yes. Well done.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this. I don't know a lot about Eleanor Roosevelt.
She was the wife of one president and the niece of another. She was Teddy Roosevelt's niece and Franklin Delano Roosevelt's wife. And her first name was actually Anna. Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, born October 11th, 1884, died November 7th, 1962. So, before we were born, but not that long before we were born, still sort of contemporary.
I had heard somewhere that Teddy Roosevelt pronounced his name Roosevelt and that FDR pronounced his name Roosevelt. So I don't know which one that would she changed it from Roosevelt to Roosevelt then when she got married?
Well, it's interesting. They were all related, and she actually Franklin Delano Roosevelt was her fifth cousin once removed. So
I think we went over this on the last podcast what that meant, and neither one of us knew.
Well, I think I know now. Basically, she was the daughter of a man named Elliot Roosevelt and a woman named Anna Rebecca Hall. And Elliot Roosevelt was the younger brother of Teddy Roosevelt, which made Eleanor his niece. Now, Elliot Roosevelt had a cousin, a fifth cousin, and that was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but she was the daughter, so she was once removed. Fifth cousin once removed.
The daughter means you're once removed?
Well,
if you're
the child, yes. So, for example, my mom's cousin, I'm a first cousin once removed.
Okay. That's odd. The removed part always throws me, as opposed to the second cousin.
Anyway.
Well, I'm from a small family, so I don't know this. I wonder if people from large families know this.
Well, you're actually from a very large family, all descended from John Howland, right? So,
right.
You're like your 14th cousin's 3 times removed to
Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, lots of famous people. So, anyway, she preferred to be called by her middle name, Eleanor, instead of Anna. On her mother's side of the family, there were tennis champions, Valentine Gill Hall III and Edward Ludlow Hall were both tennis champions. I don't know if they were played doubles together or something, but Valentine Gill Hall, who was known as Valley. And then, of course, her father's side of the family related to the president, the brother of the president, But unfortunately, she had a very, very traumatic and difficult childhood. Her mother actually was very detached, emotionally rejected Eleanor, and was ashamed of Eleanor's plainness. She didn't think Eleanor was very pretty, and she called Eleanor Granny because Eleanor was such a serious child. Her mother called her Granny. I mean, what an insult is that? Talk about some trauma.
And who gets mad at their kid for being serious?
Well, serious and plain. Those were the two.
So awful, dude.
Two things, yeah. So apparently, her mother, Anna Rebecca Hall, was not a very nice lady, and then her father, Elliot Roosevelt, was also sort of a problematic guy. He was an alcoholic, and he had an affair with a woman who was a servant in the family, and so she had a half brother through the father's affair.
I'm still kind of stuck on the idea of getting mad at your kid for the way they look. Because literally, that's genetics.
Yeah, that's true. And could have been directly from the mother, or maybe it was from the father's side. But regardless,
She probably married an ugly guy, and she took it out on her daughter, and then called her Granny. Not cool.
Well, it was also because of her seriousness. So it was a combination. It wasn't just her looks, but the mother got her just desserts because she died from diphtheria in 1892. And
you think that's justice? Huh?
Then her brother Elliot Jr. died in May of the same year. No, the following May. Sorry, in 1893. And then her father was an alcoholic and confined to a sanitarium. He died in 1894 after jumping out of a window during a fit of delirium. He survived the jump. I guess it was a drunken fit of delirium, alcoholic-induced sanitarium jump, to use all the adjectives. And he actually died from a seizure after the jump. So needless to say, Eleanor Roosevelt was subject to a lot of depression throughout her life because of all this as a child. Yeah.
Man, the days of diphtheria and delirium.
Yeah.
Good old days.
And sanitariums even.
Yeah. That's a lot of old-timey language there.
Yep. Well, that was old-timey times. And then after her parents died, she was raised by her maternal grandmother, Mary Livingston Ludlow, and she was part of the Livingston family in Tivoli, New York. And she ended up going to boarding school, Allenswood Boarding School Academy in London. And she was deeply influenced by the headmistress, Marie Salvestre, who was French and taught her to speak, I guess the school taught her to speak fluent French. So Eleanor Roosevelt did speak French from boarding school.
Upper class, though. These are upper class people.
Very wealthy. Very wealthy across the board, both sides of the family. So in 1902, she met her father's fifth cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and she met him on a train on the way to New York. I guess she was traveling home from school.
I'm glad you didn't say at a family reunion. Because even if they're fifth cousins, twice removed, or whatever you said, that's still not the place to partner up.
To hook up. Yeah.
No.
Very, very true. Very true. No, she met him on a train, and they began a secret correspondence via letter because they didn't live in the same town. And they became engaged on November 22nd, 1903. Now, once they were engaged, apparently Franklin FDR, I'll call him FDR going forward, his mother, Sarah, was quite a pill, and she did not approve. She did not approve because they were related. They were both last name Roosevelt.
I think that's the sticking point.
Yeah, kind of is. I mean, I guess, there are really common last names like Smith. If you were marrying another Smith, that might be okay because there's so many Smiths. But Roosevelt was not a common last name, right? And it was a well-known last name. So FDR's mother, Sarah, did not approve, but Teddy Roosevelt approved. Theodore Roosevelt approved and actually gave Eleanor away at the wedding. So he actually
president yet?
Theodore Roosevelt, who was president at the time, was scheduled to be in New York for St. Patrick's Day on March 17th, 1905. He agreed to give the bride away because of course, her father and mother were dead. It made front page news across the New York Times, other newspapers. And when they asked his thoughts about a Roosevelt union, President Theodore Roosevelt said, "I think it's a good thing to keep the name in the family."
That's my guy there.
Yeah. So
make light of it. He probably could have shut that down if really. I mean, you said that he approved. I'm sure that getting his approval was something that had to happen. And if he thought that was going to be too scandalous, he probably could have shut it down.
Well, he didn't. He thought it was good to keep the name in the family. And while FDR's mother, Sarah, and by the way, her last name was Delano. So that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I always thought it was Delano. I used to always say Delano, like rhyming with Eleanor, but I realize it's Delano now. She opposed it. And not only did she oppose the wedding, she was just a really persnickety mother-in-law, to the point where at some point during their marriage, after their 6 children were born, she would tell those children that this was actually a quote from James, one of FDR and Eleanor's kids, said that, yeah, Grandma Sarah used to say, "Your mother only bore you. I am more your mother than your mother is."
What a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. She was apparently pretty terrible, according to this article I read. Anyway, they had 6 children. Anna Eleanor Roosevelt died in 1975. James Roosevelt II died in 1991, the year we graduated college. Another Franklin Roosevelt, I guess he died at birth because it says 1909 to 1909. Elliott Roosevelt lived to 1990. FDR Roosevelt Jr. lived to 1988, and John Roosevelt lived until 1981. So they were actually, they were around when we were around. I mean, we could have met, 91, we could have met James Roosevelt II.
I never did, though.
No, I never did either, but that would have been pretty cool. Now, apparently, she once told her daughter, Anna, that she disliked having sex with her husband. And she said that it was an ordeal to be born.
Okay.
Eleanor also considered herself ill-suited for motherhood, writing later in life that it did not come naturally to me to understand little children or even to enjoy them. So, she by admission, she wasn't the greatest mother, but she also didn't have the greatest mother, and her parents died early. So, somewhat understandable.
Yeah. It just goes to show you that money can't, but money doesn't make you good at anything necessarily, right?
Yeah, especially being a parent. I think it's probably too much of it's probably a little bit of a hindrance in that regard.
You might even say more money, more problems.
Or I don't care too much for money because money can't buy me love.
All those cliches are true, though. Being upper crust doesn't necessarily make you suited for parenthood, for sure.
Not in this case. Well, and then more tragedy struck because in 1918, when Eleanor was unpacking one of Franklin's suitcases after a trip he had been on, she discovered a bundle of letters to him from her social secretary, Lucy Mercer. He had been contemplating leaving his wife, according to these letters. However, he had pressure politically not to leave his wife, and his mother, that awful woman, Sarah, stepped in and actually said, "You can't leave your wife either." So she threatened to disinherit Franklin if he filed a divorce. And so therefore the couple remained married. And Eleanor learned all this by reading letters that he had saved. Why he saved those letters, who knows, but he saved them.
Yeah, it's a rookie mistake. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes, of course. Of course. And once the letters were read and, she knew he had an affair, it actually said, the article said that their marriage got better because they, at that point, decided it was more a union of political partnership than, a marriage of love. And so because of that, Eleanor actually poured herself into public life and became increasingly involved in social work that she cared about, and kind of stepped away from her role as a wife and more as a political partner to FDR during his political career. So, they sort of understood each other on a level. It was like, okay, we're not really in love, but we're going to make the best of this and be a power couple.
So that was it from then on. There was no love between the two of them. No love letters between. They just decided that was the way it was going to be.
Well, I guess their youngest child was born in 1916, and the letter was discovered in 1918. So they had 6 children, and no more were born after that. So yeah, that might have been a little bit of an indication.
And of course, the general public, probably didn't know anything about this until both of them had died.
Well, so what happened, though, that actually kind of turned the tide, made things a little different. In 1921, FDR became paralyzed from polio. And his mother urged him to step away. Sarah, here she goes again, urged him to step away from politics, retire from politics. But Eleanor actually rose up and, according to many witnesses and doctors, took amazing care of him, for the fact that they weren't really in love, but she did take good care of him, like saved his life by some accounts, by the way she took care of him, and encouraged him to stay in politics, which eventually led him to the presidency.
Well, that's a different kind of love. Probably it's not romantic love, but definitely in order to take care of somebody, and you have to have some sort of love for them. Like that. I'm sure that she did. I'm sure it wasn't all in self-interest. But on the other hand, that's pretty much all he had going for him as far as she was concerned.
Politics, his political potential.
Why stay together at all if that was the end game? Interesting relationship, but I'll bet there was love there.
It ended up working out that she became the longest sitting First Lady of the United States, inaugurated on March 4th, 1933. And she actually, because of her social standing, she knew a lot of the other first ladies from that time period, from the early 1900s. She had been around them, right? Her she was, family to the president. She was given away by Theodore at her wedding. So she had been around other first ladies, and she decided that she would redefine the role of the first lady. That was kind of once he was inaugurated, she decided to make it something more important. And she really didn't like what other first ladies had done. As a matter of fact, Hoover's wife, who was First Lady Herbert Hoover's wife prior to FDR becoming president, her name was Lou, and she actually was a bit of prior to him becoming president, she was a bit of a social person, like having causes and doing things that were important. She stopped doing that when she became First Lady. She felt like it wasn't her duty to do social causes anymore, and fundraising and charities and all the stuff she had done before. Whereas Eleanor Roosevelt said, no, I'm going to do more of that. I have a big platform. So she was the first presidential spouse to hold regular press conferences, and she was the first lady to become a speaker at the National Party Convention. She wrote daily in a widely syndicated newspaper column called My Day, and that was also a first. Nobody had done that before. So she was a writer in a daily newspaper column, and she was the first lady to write a monthly magazine column and host a radio show. She became this force of nature because she had a platform, and she realized it was important for her to be on there and to really kind of bring out the things she believed in. So by 1941, she was regularly receiving lecture fees of $1,000 and was made an honorary member of Phi Beta Kappa because of her speaking achievements. So she was a pretty good public speaker.
Yeah, the thing that strikes me is, though, you said the use of radio, because I know FDR had the fireside chats, and he was really using this relatively new medium to get his message out. And I didn't know she kind of followed suit. That's really cool.
And I guess the technology was becoming more common at that time. It's always easier to adopt something once a lot of people are used to it and using it. She traveled extensively during her 12 years in the White House. She made personal appearances at labor meetings to assure Depression-era workers that the White House was mindful of their plight. She was definitely the first lady that promoted her husband's ideals. They were Democrats, by the way. She was a big force in the Democratic Party. And she showed that first ladies could play an active role in the executive branch of government.
There's a lot of secrets here going on, right? We didn't know about FDR's polio. We didn't know they were in a loveless marriage.
Wait, we did know about the polio. He was in a wheelchair.
Oh, they kept that from the public.
Really?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah, the public did not know while he was president that he was in a wheelchair. To my understanding,
Oh,
he would always be standing. They would like prop him up, and the press back then had a thing where they just they consider that a private matter.
At the time that she was first lady, she was not. She definitely was controversial. She was controversial for a lot of reasons, and she did take a lot of guff from the press and from the country. It wasn't all smiles and chocolate. She became, of course, after you go to Dirt Nap City, people think of you in a different way. But it's ironic because she was really known for speaking up for the little guy. As a matter of fact, she was huge in civil rights. So she was one of the first voices in the administration to insist that benefits be equally extended to Americans of all races, right? Because this was during the New Deal. This was after the Great Depression. So she also broke tradition by inviting hundreds of African American guests to the White House. That had never been done before, guests to be there. She also was very big into supporting Asian Americans and people who had fought in World War II to make sure they got enough compensation. So she was a big advocate for traditionally underserved people. She was actually unprecedented in the number of press conferences she had. She had 348 press conferences while she was in office during her 12 years as First Lady. And she actually put a ban on male reporters during those press conferences. It had to be female reporters. And it said that because of that, every newspaper that wanted to cover it had to have at least one female reporter on staff. And
I bet they thought she was such a pain in the ass for that.
Yeah. So part of that came down to a relationship she had with a certain female reporter, which we'll talk about in a second.
Here we go. This is what I was waiting for.
But before that, I just want to mention that she actually, again, used radio extensively, more so than Mrs. Hoover, the previous First Lady. And she first broadcast her own programs and radio commentary beginning in 1934. And on her very first broadcast, she talked about the effect of movies on children and that we needed to censor movies to make sure they didn't glorify crime or violence. And she also talked about the All-Star baseball game that had just happened. It was in July. She read a commercial for a mattress company, which sponsored the broadcast. She was the original Mattress Mac. And she said that she would not accept a salary for being on the air, and she donated it, which was $3,000. She donated that $3,000 to charity, the salary she would have received.
The censoring of movies, that reminds me of a second lady that we had. Yeah.
When FDR died in 1945, Harry Truman appointed her to be the first delegate to the newly created United Nations, and she became the chair of the UN Commission on Human Rights, where she worked to help Holocaust survivors and spearhead the Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I guess is something the UN did. And she was quoted in a speech in 1948 saying, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights." And she basically was considered one of the founders of the international human rights laws.
Yeah, I wonder if people back then, I'm sure it was split. I'm sure some people just couldn't get enough Roosevelt, and other people were probably thought, oh man, they're just in everything. This guy's been president forever, and now she's kind of taken over.
Like Chip and Joanna Gaines. It's like, oh my God, if I see another billboard. But she was great friends with Amelia Earhart. She became great friends with Lorena Hickok, who was a female reporter in the AP, Associated Press, who covered her during the presidential campaign and fell in love with her. So during that time, they wrote each other 10 to 15-page letters, and Eleanor called her Hick, and they were very, very graphic letters that said things like, "I want to put my arms around you and kiss you at the corner of your mouth." And the other one said, I can't kiss you, but I'll kiss your picture instead. And actually, at Franklin Roosevelt's
Very
1933
graphic.
inauguration, Eleanor wore a sapphire ring that Hickok had given her. And apparently this caught the eye of the FBI director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, who really despised Eleanor's liberalism, despised her civil rights stance and her criticism of the FBI at the time. And so he actually gathered evidence about Hickok being a lesbian and collected evidence that he used to or was going to use to blackmail Hickok and Roosevelt. But that never really happened.
I'm so glad those days are over, where you could blackmail somebody for.
Yes, yeah. I agree with you, but apparently they did seem to have some sort of
yes,
relationship.
And FDR couldn't say anything about it. He had letters of his own.
And then she also apparently had a very close relationship with the New York State Police Sergeant, Earl Miller, who was her bodyguard. And so she was 44 years old when she met Miller. He was 32, and he was around her all the time because he was assigned to be her bodyguard. We ended up teaching her a whole bunch of things like scuba diving, horseback riding, coached her in tennis, and they became more than friends, apparently.
I wonder if her mother would be proud of that. Her whole thing was she was plain and serious. The implication is she'd never get anybody to be interested in her. And here she is playing around all over the place.
But she found out around the time in the 30s when she was involved with Miller that her husband was having another affair with Marguerite Missy Lahand, who was his secretary. And at some point, they both realized that was going on, that they were both having affairs, and they recognized, accepted, and encouraged the arrangement. They both realized that it was something that was going to happen, and apparently Roosevelt and Miller, the police officer, Earl Miller, they were friends until her death in 1962.
This is the lifestyles of the rich and famous, man.
Out of the scandals, she served on the UN Commission of Human Rights, as I said. She helped draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. She later chaired the Kennedy administration's Presidential Commission on the Status of Women. She just was very much involved in helping people who were traditionally underserved. That was kind of her mission in life.
That's great. What an interesting life. And the part, of course, that interests me is all the secrets and the press kind of being okay with keeping some of those secrets. I'm sure you could be a lot more careless back then.
Yeah, because everything wasn't getting tweeted or Instagrammed immediately, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm sure they were careless. And I'm sure the press, especially if one of the reporters is your girlfriend, you could get away with probably a lot more than you could get away with now.
Yeah, well, apparently she said, I want to put my arms around you and kiss you at the corner of your mouth.
No, I like the next one better. You can't kiss my mouth.
Right. I can't kiss you, so I'll kiss your picture instead. Yeah,
it's steamy.
It was definitely steamy stuff for the 1930s and 40s.
I don't know. I bet you FDR's letters were a lot worse than that.
Yeah. Well,
otherwise, why would he keep them? So are those letters, do you think they're at FDR's library?
Some of them were destroyed. That's what I found out, is that some letters were actually bought by a private collector and destroyed or just hidden from public, like as part of their wanting to leave a good legacy, I guess.
There's something that love letters are something that people used to really, historians can really get a lot out of love letters. Future historians, we have texts, we have salacious emails.
Yeah.
But no love letters. I'm trying to remember if I've written any. If you're out there and I've written you a salacious love letter, give us a contact.
Please throw it up on Instagram.
Run it by me first, but I'd love to see my handiwork.
Yeah.
I can't say I never have. I just can't. I'd say I don't remember.
after all of that, she died, of course, in 1962. But before that, she actually was diagnosed before she died with a, aplastic, aplastic, aplastic anemia. I've never heard of that, but she had been hit by a car. Then she was given steroids, and those steroids apparently activated a dormant case of tuberculosis, which was in her bone marrow. I don't exactly understand what that means, but she ended up dying in 78 at the age of 78. She ended up dying of cardiac failure, probably a result of all those other things.
And what year was that?
She,
1962?
she died in 62. Yeah.
And what year did FDR die?
Oh, he died way before that. He died. That's a great question.
He died in like 48 or 49 or something.
Yeah, she lived. I think she lived 17 years longer than him. So whatever 62 minus 17, 40, 45. And of course he had polio, so that was part of the problem for him. But after her death, she was regarded as one of the most esteemed women in the world. The New York Times called her the object of universal respect in her obituary. And in 1999, not that long ago, she was ranked in the top 10 most admired people of the 20th century.
Yeah, I think for sure when you think 20th century, she's definitely, especially women, she's got to be up there, number one, probably.
And in doing my research, I saw a lot of pictures of her, and she wasn't bad looking. She wasn't as homely as her mother calling her granny made her out to be.
She definitely had some admirers, though.
Yeah, she did. She did. Well, let's just hope she's turning some heads where she is now in Dirt Nap City, and that Mr. Rogers and Evel Knievel and everybody else there is enjoying her company.
One of these days, we're going to sell a map to the graves.
Yes.
And if you want to follow our tours, you can start in North Carolina with Andre the Giant.
We're going to team up with Rick Steves to do tours of Dirt Nap City.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. He's mostly in Europe, though, isn't he?
Oh yeah, but he'll go anywhere.
So, what kind of legacy do you think? Outside of being one of the most admired women in the 20th century, what do you think that she brings?
I think civil rights were a big part of it. I didn't talk as much about that as I probably should have, but that's really kind of the essence. She was promoting civil rights long before anybody else was, and even more so, they said that her take on civil rights was more advanced and more progressive and modern than her husband's. Of course, he was president, right? So he sort of had his hands tied a little bit in what he could actually get done and what would get him reelected, because he was president for 12 years. That's longer than anybody can be president these days, right? I think two-term limit. So civil rights and women's rights, I think those two things were probably two of her strongest things. And then again, the fact that she worked with Holocaust people from World War II to ensure that they were taken care of. I don't have many details on that, but that's another thing. And then, the fact that she did have an alleged affair with another woman, I think that's also pretty interesting and trailblazing.
Although she probably didn't mean it to be, but sure. The fact that we know that, and
yeah. No, I don't think it was intentional. I think it just happened. But it just shows that love is love, right?
What's interesting is today, same set of circumstances come along, and she probably would have left FDR after the letters, and then we'd never hear from her again. It would be FDR's first wife that we don't know anything about.
Right. But she was wise, and I think he was wise to understand that their relationship was beneficial to not only them but the country. I think FDR was considered a good president, and I think she was considered it's considered one of the best first ladies we've ever had, and the fact that she redefined, I think if there was one sentence that would kind of sum her up for this, is she redefined what it meant to be first lady. Nobody before that thought of it as an important job. They thought of it more as a symbolic job, as more of a sort of, have teas and make dinners and support your husband. She did support her husband. She did travel extensively to promote his policies. And I think for the most part, they agreed on policies. She just maybe wanted to take them a little bit further, especially around civil rights.
And the last first lady that we had was a nude model. So redefining it again. So
man, they're breaking all kinds of ground there. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And I definitely feel like we needed to get a woman into the mix, and I feel like the first one we did was a pretty good one. And I certainly didn't know much about her. I honestly just Googled 100 most interesting women in the world, and her name came up, and I was like, hey, that's pretty cool. But
thank you for doing that.
Barbara Jordan was on my list, but I started reading about Eleanor Roosevelt and was like, oh, I got to talk about her because she's all kinds of interesting.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Kelly.
Sure thing. Well, this has been another episode. Be sure to check out our previous episodes on all kinds of interesting people who happen to be dead. We'll see you next time in Dirt Nap City.